thank you for joining us today. Our committee is considering two bills that take important steps to protect Americans from Washington overreach. These bills help advance two major priorities for our committee: preserving access to high-quality health care and holding the IRS more accountable to American taxpayers. We'll start with H.R. 5613, the Continuing Access to Hospitals Act of 2016, authored by Congresswoman Jenkins. This legislation will help protect access to health care in rural communities by providing needed regulatory relief to critical access hospitals. These are hospitals that are located in sparse rural areas and are frequently the only way for people in rural communities to get the care they need. By further delaying a burdensome CMS regulation through 2016, Congresswoman Jenkins' legislation helps ensure that patients have full access to health care in their communities. Our second bill today is H.R. 5523, the Clyde Hirsch Sowers Respect Act. This bipartisan legislation by Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Peter Roskam takes a strong stand for taxpayer rights by reining in the IRS's civil asset forfeiture authority. For nearly 2 years, our Oversight Subcommittee has been investigating the IRS's use of civil asset forfeiture authority to illegally seize the financial assets of law-abiding Americans. What we've seen is disturbing. On numerous occasions, the IRS has frozen the bank's accounts of innocent small business owners simply because they had a record of bank deposits that looked suspicious. Many of them were forced to forfeit their hard-earned dollars to the government, despite the fact that they had done nothing wrong. Mr. Roskam's bipartisan legislation puts in place important safeguards to help ensure the IRS's civil asset forfeiture authority can't be used to wrongfully seize the assets of honest taxpayers. And his bill is named after hardworking taxpayers who were victims of IRS abuse. Before the agency can seize the assets of any taxpayer, the Roskam bill requires the IRS to show probable cause that funds were derived from an illegal source. And if a person or small business owner's assets are seized, the bill institutes a post-seizure hearing to ensure there's transparency and accountability. Closing, I want to thank Ms. Roskam and Ms. Jenkins for their hard work in developing these two bills. These are needed solutions that will help the American people, and I hope our committee will advance them today with strong bipartisan support. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Levin for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The first bill we are marking up today, as mentioned, 5613, would help make sure that Americans living in rural America have access to the health care services they need right in their own communities. The bill would provide additional time for critical access hospitals and other small rural hospitals to comply with the CMS rule requiring these hospitals' outpatient departments to have direct supervision of physicians or other approved providers. Mr. Becerra will have an amendment that has been discussed with the majority and I think will find easy approval. The second bill we are marking up, H.R. 5523, would ensure the IRS can only conduct civil asset forfeiture proceedings for bank deposit structuring if the property came from an illegal source or structuring was done to hide criminal activity. This is, in fact, current policy at the IRS. I emphasize, this is, in fact, current policy at the IRS, and this bill would codify that policy. There's been a lot of work done on this on a bipartisan basis by a number of people, led by Mr. Roskam and Mr. Crowley, and I salute their efforts and the work of the chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. So our first order of business, H.R. 5613, to extend enforcement instructions on supervision requirements for outpatient therapeutic services and critical access in small rural hospitals. This time I'd like to recognize the bill's sponsor, Ms. Jenkins, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding a markup of H.R. 5613. This bill would delay Medicare's physician direct supervision requirement for outpatient therapeutic services and critical access in small rural hospitals through 2016. In January of 2014, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services began enforcing a requirement that physicians supervise outpatient therapy at critical access hospitals and other small rural hospitals. CMS's decision meant that routine outpatient procedures, such as undergoing active therapy, would have to be directly supervised by a physician. This decision by CMS would put a severe strain on providers, particularly those in rural areas, while providing no quality improvements for the patients that they serve. Most of these outpatient procedures are relatively simple, they're very safe, and would not benefit from a federal mandate that requires a physician always to be physically present in the hospital. And as a practical matter, in rural hospitals across America, such a requirement is simply not feasible. There are dozens of critical access hospitals in Kansas that folks rely on for care. Without these hospitals, those folks will be forced to travel further to get the care that they need because critical access hospitals can't afford to comply with its burdensome rule. In the 113th Congress, this bill was signed into law with bipartisan support to delay the direct supervision requirements through 2014. And I was pleased to introduce the legislation last year that delayed the same requirement through 2015. And Congress was able to delay the rule again and keep the regulatory burden in check. Unfortunately, rural hospitals are once again steering down the threat of this federal mandate from CMS. The existing law delaying enforcement action from CMS has expired. Accordingly, I've now introduced H.R. 5164, the Rural Hospital Regulatory Relief Act of 2016. This bill would prohibit the burdensome CMS regulation from ever taking effect. And while I would prefer that Congress pass that bill, this matter is so urgent that I have introduced this bill, 5613, to delay enforcement for an additional year so that rural hospitals are not subject to this burdensome regulation before we can work out a permanent solution. It's my hope that this committee will report this legislation favorably to be voted on as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize Ranking Member Levin or his designee for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I covered this in my opening statement, and I think we all feel that is adequate. Thank you.
Committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 5613. Without objection, the measure will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. This time, I offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute which was distributed in advance, along with the green sheet explaining it. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read, open for amendment at any point, and considered base text for purpose of amendment. I now turn to Emily Murray, the Staff Director, Subcommittee on Health, to provide the technical description of the amendment in the nature of a substitute, with an emphasis on the changes made since introduction. I ask the members hold their questions until after her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Levin. H.R. 5613, the Bipartisan Continuing Access to Hospitals Act of 2016, was introduced by Congresswoman Jenkins on July 1, 2016, and would provide continued relief to small rural hospitals so these communities can continue to have access to outpatient therapeutic services. H.R. 5613 delays the enforcement of the direct supervision regulations by providing for the extension of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services moratorium of direct physician supervision requirements for outpatient therapeutic services in critical access and small rural hospitals through the end of calendar year 2016. Delay of the enforcement of direct supervision regulations has been enacted into law in both 2014 and 2015. To clarify, this bill does not change direct supervision requirements, just delays the enforcement of those requirements. As noted on the green sheet, the Chairman's amendment would add a short title and clarify that the delay of physician supervision requirement is through 2016. Mr. Chairman, that completes my walkthrough, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Murray, are there any questions about the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Does anyone wish to strike the last word?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
I want to thank the Chairman for bringing up this bill today. Nebraska's 3rd District has 55 critical access hospitals and more than any other congressional district. To participate in the critical access program, a hospital must have 25 or fewer beds, provide 24-hour emergency care, and be a certain distance from the next closest hospital. Less commonly discussed are other Medicare conditions of participation for these facilities. For example, these hospitals must have at least one physician on call and available within 30 minutes at all times, and the average inpatient stay at these facilities may not exceed 96 hours. When I visit these facilities, the defining characteristic is that no two critical access hospitals are the same. They each serve a community with unique needs and take on unique challenges to serve those needs. The staff at each of these facilities is dedicated to serving their patients and their communities. They also know from experience what cases they and their hospital can handle and what they need to refer on to a larger facility. However, rather than trusting these providers to follow the existing rules our hospitals are subject to, CMS has sought to further constrain them. By requiring direct physician supervision, CMS is saying they don't trust nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and registered nurses to perform even the most basic tasks they are trained to do. By requiring a physician certify every single patient will not be admitted for more than 96 hours, they are saying providers don't understand which patients their facility can support. These providers are crucial to ensuring access to care in rural areas, and we should be empowering, not restricting them. This isn't just a provider issue, it's also a common sense issue. At one hospital in my district, which is an older two-story facility, I was told physician supervision enforcement would mean a doctor had to be on the same floor as the procedure being performed. Never mind a short staircase meant he or she would be no farther from the patient on the floor above them or below than being at the other end of the hallway. I think the only outstanding question here is why, when the score for every annual delay has been 0, and when no one seems to think this policy is a good idea, we continue to delay it year after year instead of repealing it. I want to thank Ms. Jenkins for introducing this bill and the chairman for today's markup. I urge support, and I hope moving forward we can work to repeal counterproductive policies like this and the 96-hour certification requirement. I yield back.
Thank you. Before we turn to amendments, does anyone else wish to strike the last word? Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute? Yes, Mr. Becerra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Thank you. The gentleman from California is recognized for the purpose of offering the amendment for you to suspend for a second while we distribute it to the members. And Mr. Becerra, since this is a fairly straightforward amendment, please go forward with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be brief since it's pretty straightforward. First, as I think everyone has said here, we need to make sure every American has access to quality health care when they need it. And in some places in America, it's very tough. And we have to make sure that we don't do anything that undermines the ability for Americans to have that care when they need it. So I think we want to make sure that we don't impose any burdensome requirements on facilities that are trying to do the best they can. Sometimes it's very difficult to be competitive in areas where you don't have that many patients that can come through your doors. And so I think all of us want to make sure we ensure that as we move forward with making access to care something that becomes universal, that we do it in ways that make it possible for facilities to continue to thrive. At the same time, I think as we continue to put a hold on these requirements, the enforcement of the supervision in outpatient care, we may want to try to collect some of the data that helps us understand what's going on in some of the facilities, how we can make sure we do things better, because the data always helps us make sure that whatever we decide to do, we'll do it based on what the evidence shows for these facilities. So this amendment simply says, let's have MedPAC, which is the commission which periodically provides guidance to Congress on what we can do with regard to Medicare programs, asking MedPAC to furnish a report to us in the next year while we defer enforcement of these supervision requirements, to give us a sense of what this has meant to these facilities and what it means to quality care and the furnishing of the care that people need in some of these areas that are lacking of the types of facilities that some of us take for granted in more populated urban settings. And so the amendment simply says, have MedPAC report to us in about a year, give us a better sense, based on some of the data, of what we're encountering in some of these facilities throughout America. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Mr. Levin, you're recognized.
I'm glad we're proceeding with this amendment, Mr. Chairman. And I'm glad, Mr. Becerra, you've raised this, because I do think these facilities are critical. It's also important that they provide adequate care. And I think what this amendment does is to say that as we consider this further, we should do so based on a substantial amount of facts and critical assessment and not simply do it anecdotally. So I do think while we want to move on, we should understand the importance of this amendment, and when we come back to take another look, we'll be able to do so based on really significant, substantial evidence and facts, and not simply the reactions from one place or another. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from the author of the bill. Ms. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Bucera, for offering this amendment. I agree quality of care is important to the delivery of a patient-centered health care system, and I have no opposition to the amendment as offered, and will support it.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Questions on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Becerra of California? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Are there additional amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If there are no further amendments, questions on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. An amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is agreed to. I'll now recognize Mr. Johnson for the purpose of offering a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee favorably report H.R. 5613 as amended to the House of Representatives.
The question is on favorably reporting the bill H.R. 5613 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 5613 as amended is ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, I ask staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bill. The members have 2 additional days to file with the committee clerk supplemental, additional, dissenting, or minority views. Our next order of business is H.R. 5523, the Clyde Hirsch Sowers Respect Act. This time, I'd like to recognize the bill's sponsor, Mr. Roscom, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got good news for this committee, and the good news for this committee is this committee's done good work. Let me tell you a quick story. Mr. Levin mentioned this in that the IRS has changed its policy, and we got to give them credit for that, but they've changed policy largely based on the activity of the Ways and Means Committee. And I want to thank several people. I want to thank my co-sponsor, Mr. Crowley from New York, who has really worked hard with me and our staffs to try and craft something to fix a problem. I also want to thank every member of the Oversight Subcommittee, Mr. Meehan, Smith, Reed, Rice, Holding, and Marchant, and my ranking member, Mr. Lewis, Rangel, Mr. Davis, and Crowley that I mentioned. So here's the backstory. If a person deposits $10,000 or more in a financial institution, that financial institution is required to report that to the federal government. And the thinking is that this is an opportunity to catch people that are doing bad acts. In other words, drug dealers or human traffickers or mafia front groups. You pick it. And so far, so good. I think most people would say that's a good thing to do. But here's what ended up happening. What ended up happening was the IRS, previous policy, the IRS came in and they were doing civil asset forfeitures, that is, gaining control of people's properties in a way that the entire subcommittee found to be scandalous and was really, really troubled by when we learned about it. So let me give you an example. Andrew Clyde served 3 combat tours in Iraq. He came home and he opened up a store in Georgia. His insurance policy only covered up to $10,000 in off-premises losses, so at the end of the business day, wisely, Mr. Clyde deposits less than $10,000. Why? Because his insurance company will only cover a the $10,000 loss threshold. So for that reason, the IRS seized $950,000 from him. You got that right. They seized every penny he had because they assumed that there was something that was nefarious that was going on. And they threatened criminal charges against him. And so basically he's begging for mercy. He says, I'll give you $50,000 to go away. He spends $100,000 in legal fees, and it was basically a legal shakedown. They took advantage of him, and it scandalized the entire subcommittee. There was no member of our subcommittee that was defending this. Everybody was scandalized. Or Jeffrey Hirsch and his brothers, who operate a company that fills inventory for convenience stores in Long Island. They're a cash-intensive business, and the brothers consistently made large deposits at their bank. And unfortunately, this led to the brothers having their bank accounts closed because their regular depositing of over $10,000 in cash caused a compliance burden that banks simply didn't want to incur. Their accountant advised them, here's the solution, deposit less than $10,000. That's your solution. That way your banker will be happy. They'd never even heard of this crime known as structuring. They were simply trying to make their bank as business-free or pain-free as possible. And what did the IRS do? They seized $460,000 from them, nearly drove them out of business and into bankruptcy. These cases go on and on and on. So here's the bottom line. What we've done is we've said, look, there has to be an underlying bad act in order for this to happen. Makes perfect sense. Representative Rangel, during one of our committee hearings, pointed out that part of the problem here, Congress, is that the underlying statute is flawed. So let's fix the statute. So we've been able to draw attention, and the IRS has changed their policy. Good news. The IRS is announcing that they are returning money from people that they shouldn't have taken money from. Good news. The IRS is acknowledging now that they're going to go back and do work to find out who else they owe money to. Good news. And the final capstone on this thing, let's change the underlying statute so this never happens again. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your support during this whole process. And I want to thank all of the colleagues on both sides of the aisle who during these hearings and during these different meetings that we've had have really offered much insight to improve this product all the way around. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Oscom. At this time, I recognize Ranking Member Levin or his designee for an opening statement.
I'm going to yield to Mr. Crowley. I just want to say this policy of the IRS was changed in October of 2014. And I think it would be well for people on this committee, including those who sometimes find it difficult to give credit to the IRS, to acknowledge that. It was changed a year and a half ago. I now yield the balance of our time to Mr. Crowley.
I thank the gentleman for yielding this time. Today's a good day for the American taxpayers, as shortly this committee will pass the Clyde Hirsch Sowers Respect Act to enact vital reforms to the federal government's civil assets forfeiture process. I want to thank Mr. Roscom particularly for his cooperation as well in working with us to bring this to the committee this afternoon. Civil asset forfeiture is an important tool that the IRS and other federal agencies use to go after ill-gotten gains from drug dealers, human traffickers, terrorists, and other criminals. This bill will not weaken that vital law enforcement tool one bit. This legislation will codify into law much-needed reforms to the process to stop abusive asset seizures, such as the ability of the government to seize a person's bank account without ever charging them with a crime. This subcommittee, our subcommittee, Oversight Subcommittee, undertook a painstaking 17-month investigation, which included holding a series of congressional hearings, meetings, and meeting with officials from a number of federal agencies, and continually keeping the pressure on the IRS to proactively contact and return any assets seized from people who were never charged with any criminal activity. These actions culminated in this bipartisan legislation that Chairman Roscom and myself are bringing before the committee today, which aims to take what we have learned and fix the system to prevent the seizure of bank accounts of law-abiding citizens. Specifically, this legislation prohibits the IRS from undertaking any civil assets forfeiture related to structuring unless the funds are from an illegal source or the funds are structured to conceal other criminal activity. Additionally, to provide due process to affected taxpayers, the bill requires the IRS to notify an account holder of a seizure within 30 days of that seizure and allows the person whose assets were seized to seek a post-seizure hearing within 30 days of the notice of seizure by a court. We know that those engaged in illegal actions will usually not contest the seizure, but for those who committed no crime, this bill levels the playing field by mandating the return of any seized bank accounts or other assets if the government can't prove that the seized funds were derived from illegal sources. But passage of this bill isn't the last part of the fight. Even as we work for a swift passage of this bill into law, we will continue to keep the pressure on the federal government to quickly return the assets of those innocent taxpayers not charged with any crimes, whose assets are still being held by the government, be they bakers, or farmers, or small business people simply trying to protect their assets This bill will go a long way, I believe, to help the average American who some of whom have been severely hurt by the law and the way in which it's written. So I look forward to working to pass this bill on the floor and to correcting the wrong in this law. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 5523 without objection. The measure will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. This time I offer an amendment in the nature of substitute which was distributed in advance, along with the green sheet explaining it. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute shall be considered as read, open for amendment at any point, and considered base text for purpose of amendment. I'll now turn to Tom Barthold, Staff Director, Joint Committee on Taxation, to provide the technical description of the amendment, the nature of substitute, with an emphasis on the changes made since introduction. I ask the members hold their questions till after his presentation. Mr. Barthold.
Thank you, Chairman Brady, members of the committee. You have before you two joint committee documents, JCX 63 and JCX 64, which describe the underlying legislation, H.R. 5523, and the Chairman's amendment, the nature of a substitute. The Chairman's amendment, the nature of the substitute, is largely clerical and technical corrections, so I will just briefly highlight the underlying bill, which has been noted by the members. Two main provisions are that forfeiture procedures must be only in the case of looking at funds derived from an illegal source or for concealing violation of criminal law, and it also establishes a notice and post-seizure review procedure. One point that was not noted in your initial discussion is the legislation also amends the Internal Revenue Code. Under present law, the federal government, if forfeited assets are returned to the individual, interest is to be paid, and under present law, that interest is included as part of income and subject to income tax. The legislation before you, as amended, would exclude from gross income any interest received from the federal government in connection with with an action to recover property seized by the Internal Revenue Service. These proposals would be effective on the date of enactment, and Mr. Chairman, that concludes my brief walkthrough. Happy to answer any questions that
Great.
members
Thank you,
might
Mr.
have.
Barthold. Are there any questions about the amendment in the nature of substitute? Does anyone wish to strike the last word? Yes, Mr. Angle, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, as I close out my service to this great committee, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Chairman Roscom as well as Joe Crawley for reminding me as to what it used to be like in this great committee. It was exciting, it was helpful, it was combative. Ideas were exchanged, and the final analysis, when any type of consensus was agreed, there was a sense that we were not Republicans, we were not Democrats, but indeed we stood up for our party, our principles, and the friendship and devotion we have to this great body. Quite frankly, I had almost given up on this process because it seems as though Democrats and Republicans have to make certain that they're not friendly to each other as a condition of being sworn in. But this has broken that unfair idea that I had, and I just want to thank these two gentlemen for reminding me what it used to be, and to give me hopes that it can return to this. Believe me, it's far more rewarding to work this way than to win a technical political battle, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to strike the last word.
Yes, sir, you're right.
And I want to identify with the words Chairman Roskin and Joe Crowley. During the debate in our subcommittee, I think I said peace broke out in our subcommittee. We all were on one accord. And I believe we did the right thing. And I just want to thank the two gentlemen for working so hard to move us to this point. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Anyone else wish to strike the last word? Yes, Dr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to co-sponsor this bill.
Is your microphone on, Dr. Davis?
Yes.
I'm pleased to co-sponsor this bill, and I agree with all the words that have been spoken. This bill fixes the law that allowed the federal government to seize the money of citizens who did nothing criminal. This was wrong, and we needed to fix it. I'm also pleased that this effort to fix the law is bipartisan. I reach out to all of my colleagues in hopes that you will work with me to change the law to stop state governments from seizing the Social Security benefits of foster youth. CRS estimates that state agencies take about $258 million in Social Security benefits from foster youth each year to bolster their coffers, often without the youth or their representatives even knowing it. Federal law allows this practice, and just as H.R. 5523 stops the federal government from profiting off of small businesses when they did nothing criminal, I hope that our committee will change the law to protect the Social Security benefits of foster youth who did nothing wrong. I ask unanimous consent to submit to the record articles from the Atlantic and TalkPoverty.org highlighting a new book by Daniel Hatcher that details these practices. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, does anyone else wish to strike the last word? Recognizing myself, I too want to thank Chairman Roscom. Good work of Mr. Crowley, Mr. Lewis. I know it was mentioned earlier that this may be an existing policy, the IRS, but policies are there one day and gone the next, enforced one day and not the next. If signed by the President, this will have the force of law. The force of law. And the taxpayers win because the hard work that the Oversight Subcommittee, these members did, and that's a good day by any measure. So does anyone else wish to strike the last word? Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If there are no amendments, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of substitute is agreed to. I'll now recognize Mr. Johnson for the purpose of offering a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee favorably report H.R. 5523 as amended to the House of Representatives.
Questions on favorably reporting the bill H.R. 5523 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 5523 as amended is ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, I ask the staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bill, and that members have 2 additional days to file with the committee clerk supplemental, additional, dissenting, or minority views. There being no further business before the committee stands adjourned.